Hi guys, it's Nico and this is the Automation Gym. Today we're going to look at virtual outputs using virtual outputs with authentication, HTTP requests, and how do we pull a virtual input directly from the mini server once we get the HTTP response back. Let's get into it. So, first thing we want to really do is understand what an HTTP request really is. So, the simplest thing you can always do is we can Google it. Let's go HTTP requests. And I think there is a nice image. Yes, there is in every single scenario. So what we can do, or what we're going to do, is we're going to have our client, which is going to be the mini server. And we're going to send an HTTP request out to a cloud, a server, some place online that is going to feed the information back to us, is going to respond. And in that response, we're going to only have the information that we need. So for example, today we're going to be looking at world population or population for a specific country. We're going to send that request, say, hey, give me the population of Germany, for example, and it's going to give us a response back saying, hey, this is the information you need. And the other thing that we're going to use is authentication, but let's look into that in a second. So we're going to be using a free API, and one of my favorite places where we can use a free API is going to be RapidAPI.com. So if you go to rapidapi.com, register yourself, it's going to be absolutely free. You can have an account up and running in a couple of seconds. Then there's going to be a big list of free APIs that you can find for sports, business, finance, and so on. But in our case, I already know which API we're going to be using. We're going to be looking at the population API. So we can just search for it. And then here it is, get population. You can see it's green, which means it's active. It uses get as the command and is going to give us the world population in real time. So if you're registered, you'll be able to see some information about the API, how popular it is, what is the latency, so how long does it take to respond back, and service level is just how frequently it goes offline. In this case, it almost never goes offline. It has 98% uptime. Now in here we can see two different things. We can get population and we can get country population. So if you want to, we can just do the one for the whole world, 8 billion, whatever it is. Or we can do specific, let's say the UK, Germany, China, Brazil, and so on. So let's do the first one, the basic one, just get population. And let's see what information we have in here. So the first thing that we'll need is the host. That is going to be the server. That's going to be the location where we're pulling the information from. And you can see that the host is going to be get-population p rapid API. And then on the right hand side, you can see a code snippet. And we can also test it if you want to. So if I go and test it in here, there we go. It gives us an HTTP response back. This is the result. And we're currently sitting at 8,044,000,000 something. Cool. So this is the information that we want to pull, and this is the information that we're going to get in our response. But how do we visualize that in a mini server? So if we go to our mini server, let's see which one it is. There we go. The first thing we'll need is we need to send that request out, and to send it out from the mini server, you need the virtual output. And the virtual outputs you can find underneath the mini server and the virtual outputs. And you can go up here and create a virtual output. We're going to call this one world population in real time. And now we need the address. So the address in here is going to be the destination. This is going to be from where we're pulling that information, or the host is what it's called also. So if you go back here, you can see this is the host. And if you go in here on the top to code snippets, you can see we have different code snippets that we can get. So for example, if you were using Python, you can go in here and select Python. And it's going to give us an example of how that is going to work. Here's the URL that we use. And here's the information that we're passing in the header. Ignore that for now. We'll go back to it later. So the first thing that we need is going to be the host. And the host is going to be the same as this. So we can just copy this And we can go back to our address, drop it in here. And now, why did I not copy the whole thing with / population? Simple. So these are going to be endpoints, and they're going to be different depending on what information you want to get. So this is where the magic of APIs really happens, is if you have a different endpoint, you can just pull specific bits of information rather than all of it at the same time. So that way you're not overwhelming the server that is sending you the information, and you're also not overwhelming the client or the local host, that being the mini server, with too much requests going out. So you see, if I go in here on the left and I click on get country population, the endpoint is going to slightly change. And now, something to make your life a little bit easier, instead of using Python and requests, we can go and use just HTTP 1.1, because this is the simplest form that we have. And you can see here's the endpoint that we're going to use if we want to get a specific country, or if you want to just get the world population, it is / population. There's the key, and here's the host. Again, the host and the address in here, exactly the same thing, also called a URL. So we have our endpoint. Let's now create a command to be able to send that HTTP request. So click on it, go up here to virtual output command, click, and this is going to be world population in real time. Now the command for on is actually going to be our destination. And if you go back in here, we can see the destination or the endpoint, it's / population, because we're not putting something specific. Cool. We can come in here and we can just put the / population. And now the next thing we need to do is we need to authenticate, because if you don't authenticate, let's see what happens. We can quite easily go, let's grab the host again, and I'll create the command for you up here, / population. This is what we currently have. If I press enter, that is going to send a request, and here's what I'm getting back. Invalid API key, go to HTTP, some information. So we do require an API key. We do require authentication to be able to pull that information from that server, which is very common. It's very normal. A lot of systems are either going to be paid, blocked, or there's going to be a certain limit of requests one person can make a day. And then these requests are going to be locked to your username. And then your API key is just a unique way of identifying that this is your key, you are the user, and we need that information to be able to allow you to use that API or to send you that information back. Otherwise, you can be using far too many requests, or you can be trying to pull too much information, or if it's a paid API, you're not going to have the key in the first place. So that is why we need it. So if we were to just go to that endpoint and just try to use that command, nothing's really going to happen. We're not going to be able to read the information. So this is where our key comes in handy. And if you look on the left-hand side, you see that there's a little bit more text in here. So the host we already used. However, we have the RapidAPI key that we definitely do need. And we have the host again. So this is the information that we need to paste or parse in the header. So whenever you send a request out, in usually what is called the header is going to be an additional piece of information. In our case, hey, this is my key, and this is where I want to use it for. So if you copy that, go to the mini server, you see here it is, HTTP header for on. So whenever we want to send the command out, we do need to put that information in. So I need to put my key and whatever else is required. For different APIs, it's going to be a different structure, but that is the general structure you use for most of them. So we say OK, our key is in, and technically we can now use it to get requests. However, what is going to happen, we're not going to see anything. There's no way to see the response back in real time from the mini server, or, well, there is. Let me show you. Let's drop it on the page. I'm going to just put a pulse generator. So I'm going to push that request every 10, every 30 seconds. Let's say, let's do 15 seconds. So we're not being too greedy when it comes to the API. Because also, whenever you're sending requests, especially to a free API, you probably have some kind of a limit. You may have a limit of, let's say, 2000 calls a day. And then if you were pulling that information too frequently, once a second, you only have so many requests that you can make up until the API says, no, you're blocked, you can no longer use that information, do something else. So here's our GET request up and running. What we can do is if you look in here on the mini server, we do have an HTTP monitor. And then we are looking to filter a little bit of that. So if you put just population down, there we go. You can see we get a request. So this is us pushing the request and we then get the response back. If I am to copy that whole thing, I'm just going to drop it in a node file so we can see it. There we go. We do get some information back. And in that information, we can see length, power, and so on. But this currently doesn't make too much sense. And when we were to pull information, we don't need all of this. The successful authentication, friction, all of that doesn't matter. So let's ignore it for now, and we'll see where else we can store that information and use it later. So whenever we get the response back, the response is going to be something very, very similar to this. So let's test it, test the endpoint. So we're looking for a similar response, and then you can see the example response in here. There it is. So current word count, what changes, and so on. Now, if you look at the command, the virtual output command itself, you see all the way down here, we have save HTTP reply. So what we can do is whenever we get the response back, or whenever we get, after we push our request, we get the response, we can save that file somewhere. And obviously, where you can save it on the mini server. You can also save it on a local device. So let's say you have a server running on your system. Maybe it's a syslog server. Maybe it's just a server. You have 1 terabyte of storage on the local system. You can also send it to that. You can send it to your PC as well. But for now, for this example, we'll just save it into the mini server. And then we're going to pull that information from the mini server with a virtual input so we can extract the data out. So if you look at the example in here, you have some folders. So that is going to go direct to the mini server. So there's a user folder, and then within that folder, there's a common. And then we can name the file anything we want. I'm just going to call it world population.html. You can save them both as HTML or XML files. It doesn't matter. I'll say it as HTML just because it's going to be easier to read it afterwards. And let's save this into the mini server and see what happens. So once this pushes, this time around, it's not going to just pull it on the mini server, see it for a second. It's going to actually create a new file. It's going to save it onto the device. Now, what we can do is I'm going to create a new user because it's going to be a good example for later. So let's add a new user. I'm going to call it FTP because this is what we'll be doing. We'll FTP into the mini server in a second. I'm going to give him the password, something simple for now. For this example, FTP21, FTP21, which is the default port for FTP. Password, username, all that doesn't matter. It can be your admin user as well if you want to just make it quick and simple. Then we give him permissions. And when it comes to permissions, you can give him a web interface and FTP. But right now, keep it simple. Let's just give him full access and apply that. There we go. Save in. And now we're going to use this user to log into our mini server in real time. So I'll close these and I'll actually show you how to get there. Now, if you open your File Explorer, you can go FTP column 2//, then the IP of your mini server. You can see I've already done this before. Press enter It's going to think for a second, because when it comes to the mini server, yes, it is on the local network, but access is going to be locked by a password. And this is exactly why we created the user and why we gave him full access. So username FTP, my password is FTP21, and I can log on. And there we go. So what this is the mini server's SD card. So FTP is file transfer protocol, and just what we can use to log into the mini server. So in here you have backup files, you have tools, temporary files, your statistics, everything's pretty much saved in here. And if you remember from a second ago, when we looked at our command, we saved it to user, common, word population HTML. So if we go to user, actually can't see it, user, there it is. Wow, let's make them extra large. There we go. Oh, maybe a little bit smaller. There we go. User. Then we have common. And now in here, you can see I've been doing something else before, but we have world population.html. Cool. Now this is the file that we're going to be pulling back from the virtual input. So let's see how do we do that. Now I can obviously grab that file, save it on my PC, open it, do anything with it, but we don't want to do it this way because we'll eventually still need it for a virtual input. Then we go and create one. We need an HTTP virtual input. Click on it in here. So this is going to be world population in real time. Again, the name doesn't really matter. We can change it around, but what we need to do in here is we need to put a URL of the mini server because we're pulling that information from the mini server, and I'm just going to create it in here so you guys can see it. So we're using the exactly same command that we just did. We're going to use dev fs get. We're going to go to the user folder, then common, and then the name of our file, which is going to be world population.html. And then that URL obviously needs to be addressed to the mini server before anything else. So we do put the mini server's IP in here, 168.069. And also, because we need to authenticate, because otherwise it's obviously not going to work, it's not going to give us access, we do put FTP as the user, FTP21 as the password at the mini server. If you want to make it into a URL, you can also do HTTPS or HTTP // and that is our endpoint. So we can now copy that. I'm going to leave it in here on the page so you guys can see it. I can go to my virtual input and go to URL, paste that information here. Now we know that we're currently sending the request out every 15 seconds. So in here we can also pull it every 15 seconds. And then the last thing we need to do is if you look at virtual input command, we click on it, and this is actually the command that we're going to be parsing the information through. So this is again world population in real time. Again, we can change the names around, but it's not as important at the moment. Come in here, well, save in the mini server first, then we go to our command recognition, click on the 3 dots, and there we can see it. This is the response. So we send the command out, we authenticate it, we then got the response. The response was saved in the mini server, and now we're going directly to our mini server and we're reading that information out. The only thing left to do is the same as the video on virtual inputs. We're going to parse through that information. So we're going to skip everything up to here, /i/v. And we're only looking for this bit of information. So the 8 billion, 44 million, so on. So we can now go and, minimize, go and apply our settings. There we go. Drop it on the page. And the only thing I will change is I'll remove that v.1 because obviously it's an integer, it's a whole number. Save in the mini server. And let's see. Start live view. Boom. Now that information should be changing. We can see that we're going to be pulsing the request out. Let me close this up. We pulse it. Then the virtual input tries to fetch it every 15 seconds. So it's going to keep updating. And that is pretty much it. That's all we really need to do. The only thing to consider is that whenever we're saving information to the mini server or to the SD card of the mini server, any SD card has a specific lifespan, read-write cycles that it can take. So we don't want to save information to it too frequently. Fortunately, we don't need to in most cases. We only need to push, let's say, once a day, twice a day, or if it's a specific product that you're using, only when you use that product. So we don't need to do it every 15 seconds on a push generator. Now with this information, you can do everything you want. Doesn't matter, up to you. This is a word population. If you want, you can put it in the app. You can do some fancy logic to say if word population goes X, I don't know, flash the lights in the kitchen, but you probably wouldn't have to. Another very quick example, just to show you the other endpoint. So what we've done already, in our case, is we use the get population. But now if you want to pull specific information, let's say we want to pull, I don't know, let's say China, for example. We can test it in here, test the endpoint, and here's the specific information for China only. What we can do is you see that the endpoint is going to change, but everything else is going to stay the same. So I'm going to copy that endpoint. I will go to my world population request. I'm going to create another virtual output command. And this is going to be China's population in real time. I'm going to put the command for on as the endpoint, exactly the same as this one. And then everything else we can copy from here. So this we can get as the header for on because it's the same API key we're using. And the only difference would be, obviously in here we're saving the word population. We want to create maybe a new file, but we can copy that path. We can go to save HTTP reply. And the one thing would be, in here is going to be China population. So it's going to create a new file that's going to be for China population. Grab it on the page. I'll connect to the same push generator, so it requests it every 15 seconds or so. Or maybe what you'd like to do in some cases is just stagger them out a little bit if the API is not able to handle multiple requests. So maybe this one is going to be every 14 seconds or 16 seconds, just so they're not being sent exactly at the same time. Okay. Saving the mini server. And now, as soon as that is pushed, it's going to create again a new file. That file is going to be called China population.html. So we can do exactly the same with a virtual input. Let's create another one. Call it virtual, wow, no. Call it China's population in real time. And we can go to world population in real time. We can copy almost the whole thing, but obviously the part that is going to be different is now, instead of using this, the file that we're pulling that information from, I think we called China population. So let's copy this one in, say okay. I'm going to create another, where'd you go? There it is. I'm going to copy the URL in here. Grab another virtual HTTP input, China's population. I'll save in a mini server. And now this time around, once it pushes the request out, there should be a file created on the mini server. We click on the 3 dots and there we can go. You can see now it's no longer the 8 billion, it's only 1.4 billion. So we can do exactly the same, just parse through this and grab the value itself. Oh, we didn't parse the column. There we go. apply. And again, I'm going to remove this. I'm just going to do V, drop it on the page, save in the mini server. And as soon as it pulls, there we go. So we have the different endpoints, as you can see. One is just pulling China's information. The other one is pulling for the whole world. And this is where the requests are very, very handy, because otherwise you can imagine a scenario where we're pulling the whole information for the whole world. So it's going to be a very big file and we're going to parse that information through. But in that case, it's just much easier to go to one endpoint and then just say, okay, I request China's information, I request world's information, Germany, Bulgaria, UK, USA, and so on. Okay, awesome. So, as always, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. Also, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave them down as well. I'm going to leave all the links for the useful websites, for WizCool, RapidAPI, and maybe some information about how to create commands. And that's it from me, guys. Thank you, and see you next time. Cheers.